Chapter 1. The Giant That Shook the Earth. Imagine walking through a forest and suddenly hearing footsteps. Not human footsteps, not even elephant footsteps. Footsteps so massive they make the ground shake beneath your feet. You look up through the trees and see something that shouldn't exist. A creature so tall it has to duck under tree branches that are 20 feet high. Its hands are bigger than dinner plates. Its teeth could crush bones like we crush potato chips. This isn't a movie monster. This isn't fantasy. This actually happened. And it happened not in some distant world, but right here on Earth. Less than 300,000 years ago, when early humans were already walking around, there lived the most massive ape that ever existed. Its name was Gigantopithecus, and it was absolutely terrifying. But here's the crazy part that scientists still argue about today. How did something so huge, so powerful, so perfectly built for survival just disappear? And even stranger, did it really disappear completely? If you're ready to dive into one of science's most fascinating mysteries, hit that subscribe button because we're about to explore evidence that will make you question everything you thought you knew about prehistoric life. Some of what you'll hear tonight might even change how you think about those mysterious footprints people find in remote forests today. Let me paint you a picture of what Earth looked like when these giants ruled the forests. Picture southern China about 2 million years ago. The world is different then. Ice sheets cover much of the north, but down here in the subtropical forests, life explodes in ways we can barely imagine today. Rivers run crystal clear through endless bamboo forests. The air hums with insects we've never seen. Tigers patrol territories 10 times larger than any tiger territory today. And somewhere, in the thick green shadows, something massive moves through the undergrowth. The first clue that this creature existed came from the most unlikely place, a traditional medicine shop in Hong Kong. In 1935, a scientist named Ralph von Koenigswald was browsing through ancient remedies when he spotted something impossible. Among the dragon teeth being sold as medicine was a molar so large it didn't match any known alive today. But size wasn't its only incredible feature. This ape had developed the most powerful jaw muscles ever recorded in a primate. Its skull had massive ridges where these muscles attached, giving it a bite force that could crack nuts the size of bowling balls. Think about that for a second. While our human ancestors were learning to use simple stone tools, these giants were wandering the same forests, equipped with biological tools that could crush almost anything nature threw at them. Yet somehow, they vanished. And that's where this story gets really interesting. Because the more scientists study Gigantopithecus, the more questions they uncover. Questions that don't have easy answers. Questions that make some researchers wonder if we really know the whole story. Before we go deeper into this mystery, take a second to hit that like button if you're already fascinated by these giants. And let me ask you something that might keep you thinking all night. If an animal this powerful and well-adapted could disappear so completely, what else might be hiding in Earth's remote places that science hasn't found yet? Chapter 2. When Titans Walked Among Us. To understand how incredible Gigantopithecus really was, we need to travel back to a world where giants were normal. This wasn't just one oversized ape wandering around alone. This was an entire ecosystem, built on a scale that would seem impossible today. During the Pleistocene epoch, Asia was home to creatures that make today's wildlife look tiny. Cave bears the size of small cars, tigers bigger than modern lions, elephants with tusks longer than telephone poles, and ruling over the forest canopy was Gigantopithecus. But what made these apes truly special wasn't just their size. It was how perfectly they were built for their world. Every part of their body tells us a story about survival in an environment we can barely imagine. Their teeth reveal the most fascinating details. Unlike other apes who ate both plants and meat, Gigantopithecus was completely vegetarian. But not the kind of vegetarian that nibbles on soft leaves. These giants specialized in eating the toughest, most fibrous, adapt when their environment changed. Other researchers disagree completely. They point out that being able to eat the toughest plants in the forest should have been an advantage, not a weakness. If anything, these giants should have been able to survive when other animals starved. This debate gets to the heart of one of paleontology's biggest mysteries. How do we explain the extinction of an animal that seemed perfectly built to survive anything? The plot thickens when we look at where these creatures lived. Fossil evidence shows Gigantopithecus spread across a huge area of Asia, from northern India to southern China. This wasn't a small population hanging on in one tiny habitat. These were successful animals, with a range covering millions of square miles. They lived alongside early human species like Homo erectus. Think about that meeting for a moment. Imagine being an early human, barely 5 feet tall, coming face to face with a 10-foot tall ape in the forest. How would that encounter play out? Some scientists think humans and Gigantopithecus might have competed for the same resources. Others believe they lived in completely different parts of the forest and rarely interacted. But there's a third theory that's much more controversial. What if early humans didn't just encounter Gigantopithecus? What if they remembered them? This is where science meets folklore in ways that make researchers uncomfortable. Cultures across Asia have ancient stories about giant forest spirits, massive hairy creatures that lived in the deep woods. For decades, scientists dismissed these as pure mythology. But now some researchers are asking different questions. What if these stories aren't myths? What if they're cultural memories of real encounters with Gigantopithecus? The timeline almost works. Gigantopithecus went extinct somewhere between 300,000 and 200,000 years ago. Modern humans were spreading across Asia around the same time. Could there have been overlap? Could some populations of Gigantopithecus have survived longer than we think? This brings us to an uncomfortable question that splits the scientific community. When we say Gigantopithecus is your mind. Despite being the largest ape that ever lived, despite existing for over 1 million years, and despite living alongside early humans, we have almost no fossil evidence of Gigantopithecus. Think about that. We have thousands of dinosaur fossils from creatures that lived 65 million years ago. We have detailed skeletons of animals that died hundreds of millions of years ago. But from a giant ape that lived recently enough that early humans might have seen them, we have fewer than 2,000 teeth and 4 partial jawbones. That's it. No complete skull, no arm bones, no leg bones, no spine. Nothing that would tell us exactly how these creatures moved, how they lived, or how they died. This isn't just unusual, it's almost impossible. Large animals that live in forests usually leave lots of fossil evidence. Bones get buried in river sediments, teeth get preserved in cave deposits, bodies get trapped in tar pits or frozen in ice. So where are all the Gigantopithecus fossils? Some scientists think the answer is simple. Forest environments are terrible for preserving fossils. The acidic soil, the constant moisture, the activity of insects and bacteria. Everything works together to break down bones before they can fossilize. But other researchers aren't satisfied with this explanation. They point out that we have plenty of fossils from other forest animals that lived at the same time. We have tiger bones, elephant bones, deer bones, even bird bones from the same locations where Gigantopithecus teeth have been found. Why would the bones of other animals survive, while Gigantopithecus bones completely disappear? This question leads to some controversial theories that make traditional paleontologists very uncomfortable. Theory number 1. Gigantopithecus had very different behavior than we think. Maybe these giants didn't live in the same places where other animals died and got fossilized. Maybe they had burial behaviors, or maybe they died in locations where fossils simply can't form. Theory number 2. The timeline is wrong. Maybe Gigantopithecus didn't go extinct as early as we think. Maybe some populations survived much more recently, in places where of the New Holland mouse, extinct for 100 years. In 2019, they rediscovered the Fernandina Island tortoise, missing for 112 years. Extinction is much harder to prove than you might think, especially for large, intelligent animals that live in remote areas and might actively avoid humans. The fossil evidence for Gigantopithecus shows they were incredibly successful for over 1 million years. They survived multiple ice ages, climate changes, and environmental shifts that killed off many other species. They had huge territories, flexible diets, and powerful bodies built for survival. Then suddenly, according to the fossil record, they all disappeared at exactly the same time across their entire range. No gradual decline, no evidence of disease or environmental catastrophe, just gone. Does that sound like a natural extinction to you? Or does it sound like something else? Here's what makes this even stranger. The last confirmed Gigantopithecus fossils date to about 300,000 years ago. But that's also right around the time when early humans were developing more advanced hunting techniques and spreading rapidly across Asia. Coincidence? Or connection? Some researchers think humans might have directly caused Gigantopithecus extinction through hunting or habitat destruction. Others think the two events are unrelated, but there's growing evidence that the relationship between humans and Gigantopithecus was much more complex than we originally thought. If this mystery is keeping you engaged, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're about to dive into evidence that suggests this story is far from over. Because here's the thing that really bothers researchers who study Gigantopithecus. For an animal that was supposedly extinct 300,000 years ago, it shows up in way too many places it shouldn't. Chapter 4. Secrets hidden in ancient teeth. Every Gigantopithecus tooth tells a story, and when scientists started reading those stories carefully, they discovered things that changed everything we thought we knew about these giants. The first surprise came from chemical analysis. By studying the isotopes locked inside ancient tooth enamel, researchers could figure out exactly what Gigantopithecus ate, and even what the climate was like. The answer might be competition. As the Pleistocene epoch progressed, forests across Asia were filling up with new species. Early humans were spreading rapidly. Other ape species were evolving and expanding their territories. Resources that Gigantopithecus had once had to themselves were becoming crowded. But here's the controversial part. Some scientists think the competition wasn't just about food. They think it might have been about something much more dangerous. Territory. Recent analysis of Gigantopithecus teeth shows tiny scratches that suggest they were using tools. Not sophisticated tools like humans, but simple sticks and stones to help process food and possibly defend themselves. Tool use in extinct apes is incredibly rare. It suggests a level of intelligence that most researchers didn't expect to find in Gigantopithecus. And intelligent animals don't usually go extinct easily. The tooth evidence also reveals something else that challenges traditional extinction theories. The very last Gigantopithecus fossils show no signs of starvation, disease, or environmental stress. The teeth are healthy, well-formed, and show normal wear patterns. These animals weren't struggling to survive. They weren't slowly dying out due to climate change or habitat loss. Right up until they disappear from the fossil record, they seem to have been thriving. So what happened to them? Dr. Wei Wang, one of the leading Gigantopithecus researchers, has proposed a theory that makes a lot of scientists uncomfortable. He thinks Gigantopithecus might have been too successful for their own good. Here's his reasoning. As these giants got bigger and more powerful over time, they needed larger territories to support themselves. A single family group might have needed dozens of square miles of forest to find enough food. But at the same time, human populations were growing and expanding. Humans were using fire to clear forests and create hunting grounds. They were building permanent settlements and claiming territory. Wang thinks there might have been direct conflict between humans and Gigantopithecus over land and resources. And in that conflict, intelligence and technology eventually beat size and strength. Other researchers think this theory goes too far. They argue that there's no direct evidence of conflict between humans and Gigantopithecus. No fossil sites show human interference. There's no evidence of major volcanic activity or asteroid impacts in Asia 300,000 years ago, which leaves the third option. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. While most scientists focus on how Gigantopithecus went extinct, a small group of researchers are asking a different question. What if the tooth evidence is telling us that Gigantopithecus didn't go extinct? What if it's telling us that they learned to hide? Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. You're a large, intelligent ape. Smaller, more aggressive creatures with weapons are taking over your territory. What do? You could fight and probably lose. You could try to compete and slowly starve. Or you could retreat deeper into the forest, avoid contact, and survive in places where the competition can't follow. For highly intelligent animals, behavioral extinction, becoming so secretive that scientists think you're extinct, might be a better survival strategy than actual extinction. If you're intrigued by where this evidence is leading, make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to explore the most controversial theory in Gigantopithecus research. But first, leave a comment and tell me what you think. Based on what you've heard so far, do you think Gigantopithecus really went extinct? Or could some of them have survived by becoming masters of hiding? Chapter 5. The Great Extinction Debate. The scientific community is split down the middle on one of the most important questions in paleontology. How exactly did Gigantopithecus go extinct? On one side, you have traditionalists who believe climate change killed them off. On the other side, you have researchers who think humans were responsible. And in the middle, there's a growing group of scientists who aren't convinced Gigantopithecus went extinct at all. Let's start with the climate change theory, because it's the most widely accepted explanation among mainstream paleontologists. About 300,000 years ago, Asia was experiencing dramatic environmental shifts. Ice ages were becoming more severe and more frequent. Forests were shrinking. The bamboo forests that Gigantopithecus depended on were being replaced by grasslands. According to this theory, Gigantopithecus was too specialized to adapt. They had evolved massive bodies that require climate shift be different. Second, other large plant-eating animals in the same regions survived these exact same environmental changes. Giant pandas, Asian elephants, and various deer species all made it through the same climate shifts that supposedly killed Gigantopithecus. Third, the fossil evidence shows Gigantopithecus was actually becoming more adaptable over time, not less. Their teeth show increasing dietary flexibility, not increasing specialization. This brings us to the human interference theory, which is gaining support among researchers who study early human expansion. The timing is suspicious. Gigantopithecus disappears from the fossil record at exactly the same time that early humans were spreading rapidly across Asia and developing more sophisticated hunting technologies. Early humans weren't just hunters, they were ecosystem engineers. They used fire to clear vast areas of forest and create hunting grounds. They built permanent settlements that required clearing large territories. They domesticated dogs that could track and harass large animals. Dr. Hervé Bocquerens from the University of Tübingen has studied this theory extensively. His research shows that human expansion across Asia coincides almost perfectly with the extinction of multiple large mammal species, including Gigantopithecus. When humans arrive in a new area, Bocquerens explains, large animals start disappearing. It's a pattern we see all over the world, from Australia to the Americas to Asia. But the human interference theory has problems too. There's no direct evidence of humans hunting Gigantopithecus. No fossil sites show Gigantopithecus bones with cut marks or spear points. No cave paintings show humans interacting with giant apes. This leads us to the third theory, which is the most controversial of all: behavioral extinction. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology, argues that Gigantopithecus might not be extinct at all. Instead, he thinks they might have learned to avoid human contact so completely that scientists assume they're gone. We're talking about highly intelligent primates, Meldrum says. They had large brains, complex social structures, and tool use capabilities. When faced with human expansion, their best survival strategy might have been to retreat, decline, because there wasn't a gradual decline. The species didn't go extinct, it went underground. The behavioral extinction theory is supported by some interesting evidence. Fossil sites that should contain Gigantopithecus remains from after 300,000 years ago are completely empty, not just lacking Gigantopithecus fossils, but lacking any fossils of large mammals. This suggests that large, intelligent animals in these areas learned to change their behavior in ways that prevented fossilization. They stopped dying in caves, river valleys, and other places where bones typically get preserved. But perhaps the strongest support for behavioral extinction comes from modern parallels. We know that great apes can learn to avoid human contact almost completely. Mountain gorillas, orangutans, and chimpanzees in heavily hunted areas develop sophisticated avoidance behaviors. They travel at night, stay away from human trails, and can remain completely hidden, even in areas where humans are actively looking for them. If modern apes can do this, why couldn't Gigantopithecus have developed even more advanced hiding behaviors? The debate between these theories isn't just academic. It affects how we understand extinction, human impact on the environment, and the possibility that large, unknown species might still exist in remote areas. What do you think makes the most sense? Climate change, human interference, or behavioral extinction? Let us know in the comments, and if this debate is keeping you engaged, hit that like button, because we're about to explore evidence that might resolve this debate once and for all. And some of that evidence comes from places you might not expect. Chapter 6. Bigfoot's Ancient Ancestor. Now we're entering territory where science meets folklore, and where respectable researchers risk their careers by asking uncomfortable questions. For over a century, people across Asia and North America have reported encounters with large, hairy, human-like creatures in remote forests. Most scientists dismiss these reports as misidentification, hoaxes, or cultural mythology. But a small group of researchers are asking a different question. What if these reports aren't mythology? What if they're evidence that Gigantopithecus didn't go extinct after all? Before you roll, avoiding human contact. Third, the behavioral descriptions fit with what we know about intelligent ape behavior. These creatures are reported to be nocturnal, extremely secretive, and capable of complex problem solving. They're said to be curious about humans, but careful to avoid direct confrontation. Dr. Grover Krantz, who was a professor of anthropology at Washington State University until his death, spent decades studying this possibility. He argued that the anatomical details in eyewitness reports were too consistent and too accurate to be explained by hoaxes or misidentification. When people describe the way these creatures walk, the proportions of their bodies, the shape of their feet, they're describing anatomical features that most people wouldn't know about, Krantz argued. They're describing features that match what we would expect from a surviving Gigantopithecus population. The footprint evidence is particularly intriguing. Over the decades, hundreds of large footprints have been found in remote areas. Most are dismissed as hoaxes, but some show anatomical details that are difficult to fake. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum has spent years analyzing these footprints. His conclusion: while most are indeed hoaxes or misidentifications, a small percentage show anatomical features consistent with a large bipedal primate. The foot morphology in some of these tracks shows adaptations for weight distribution and locomotion that would be very difficult for a hoaxer to understand, let alone replicate, Meldrum explains. But the most compelling evidence might be genetic. In 2014, Dr. Brian Sykes from Oxford University published results from DNA analysis of hair samples that people claimed came from unknown primate species. Most samples turned out to be from known animals like bears, wolves, or domestic dogs. But several samples showed unusual genetic signatures that didn't match any known species. The DNA was primate-like, but different from any modern ape. Some sequences showed characteristics that could be consistent with an ancient primate lineage. Sykes was careful not to claim these samples proved the existence of surviving Gigantopithecus, but he did acknowledge that the results were intriguing and deserving of further study. The genetic evidence becomes even more interesting when we consider recent discoveries about primate evolution. In the past decade, and scientists who seriously study cryptozoology often find themselves marginalized or ridiculed. But attitudes are slowly changing. The discovery of new species in remote areas happens regularly. DNA analysis is making it possible to identify species from tiny tissue samples. And remote sensing technology is revealing areas of unexplored habitat that could potentially support unknown species. Dr. Darren Naish, a paleontologist and science writer, argues that the scientific community should take these possibilities more seriously. We live on a planet where new species are discovered every week, Naish points out. Most of these are insects or small mammals, but large species discoveries still happen. It's scientifically irresponsible to dismiss the possibility of unknown primates without proper investigation. The Gigantopithecus Bigfoot connection is also supported by cultural evidence that mainstream scientists often ignore. Indigenous peoples across Asia and North America have traditional stories about giant forest spirits or wild men that date back thousands of years. These stories often include remarkably consistent details about behavior, appearance, and habitat preferences. Anthropologists typically interpret these stories as pure mythology, but some researchers think they might be cultural memories of real encounters with surviving populations of ancient primates. The Himalayas, the Pacific Northwest, the forests of Siberia, and the mountains of Central Asia all have vast areas that remain largely unexplored by science. These regions have the right climate, vegetation, and isolation to potentially support small populations of large primates. Could Gigantopithecus have survived in these areas by becoming masters of concealment? Could they have developed behaviors so specialized for avoiding human contact that they've managed to stay hidden for hundreds of thousands of years? If you think this possibility is worth investigating, let us know in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to explore what life might have been like when humans and giants shared the same world. Chapter 7. Life in the Shadow of Giants. Imagine what it would have been like to live in a world where 10-foot-tall apes were a normal part of the landscape. Actually like. Dr. Russell Shoshone from the University of Iowa has spent decades reconstructing what he calls the world of giants. His research paints a picture of an environment where size, intelligence, and technology created complex survival strategies. Early humans were physically no match for Gigantopithecus, Shoshone explains. But they had advantages that might have been even more important: fire, tools, and social cooperation. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans in Gigantopithecus territory developed some unusual behavioral adaptations. They built their camps in elevated locations, often on cliffs or hilltops. They created extensive fire barriers around their settlements, and they developed weapon technologies that seemed specifically designed for dealing with large animals. Were these adaptations for defense against Gigantopithecus, or were they for hunting them? The evidence could support either interpretation. Spear points found at early human sites in southern China are unusually large and robust. They're built for penetrating thick hide and muscle mass. But they could have been used for defense just as easily as for hunting. Fire barriers around settlements suggest fear of large predators or competitors. But again, this could indicate defensive measures against Gigantopithecus, or it could indicate that humans were using fire to drive Gigantopithecus away from valuable resources. The relationship becomes even more complex when we consider what early humans might have learned from observing Gigantopithecus. These giants were master foragers. They knew which plants were edible, which ones were medicinal, and which ones were poisonous. They had detailed knowledge of seasonal food sources, water locations, and safe shelter sites. Early humans who observed Gigantopithecus behavior could have gained valuable survival information. Following giant apes to food sources, water holes, and safe caves could have been a crucial survival strategy. Some researchers think this learning relationship might explain why early human populations in Asia developed more sophisticated plant processing technologies than human populations in other parts of the world. They learned from watching the masters. But there's also evidence that the relationship wasn't always peaceful. Gigantopithecus populations. These giants needed dense forest canopy for food and shelter. Open grasslands offered them nothing. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The archaeological evidence suggests that early humans weren't just randomly burning forests. They were targeting specific areas that Gigantopithecus depended on most heavily. Bamboo groves were burned repeatedly. Fruit tree forests were cleared and converted to grasslands. Mountain valleys with reliable water sources were systematically deforested. This looks like deliberate habitat destruction, designed to force Gigantopithecus out of the best territories. If this interpretation is correct, it means early humans were capable of complex ecological warfare. They understood how to attack their competitors, not through direct confrontation, but by destroying the resources their competitors needed to survive. The evidence for this interpretation includes the timing and location of major forest fires across Asia. These fires cluster around known Gigantopithecus habitat areas and coincide with periods of rapid human population growth. But not all researchers agree with this warfare interpretation. Some think the relationship between humans and Gigantopithecus might have been much more complex. Dr. Melanie Chang from Stanford University has proposed a co-evolution theory that suggests humans and Gigantopithecus might have developed a mutualistic relationship. Large primates are incredibly effective at seed dispersal, Chang explains. Gigantopithecus could have been unwittingly helping early human communities by spreading the seeds of useful plants across wide areas. In this interpretation, early humans might have actually benefited from having Gigantopithecus in their territory. The giants could have been inadvertent partners in forest management, creating diverse plant communities that humans could exploit. The co-evolution theory is supported by evidence showing that some plant species in former Gigantopithecus territory have seed characteristics that suggest they evolved to be dispersed by very large animals. These plants have seeds that are too big for smaller animals to swallow, but perfectly sized for giant apes. The distribution patterns of these plants match the historical range of Gigantopithecus almost perfectly. Could it be that humans, Gigantopithecus, and certain plant species? Thoughts in the comments, and if you're fascinated by this ancient world, hit that subscribe button. We're about to explore the most mysterious aspects of the Gigantopithecus story, evidence that science still can't fully explain. Chapter 8. What science can't explain. There are aspects of the Gigantopithecus mystery that don't fit into neat scientific categories. Evidence that makes researchers uncomfortable. Findings that challenge our understanding of extinction, evolution, and what's possible in the natural world. Let's start with the distribution problem. Gigantopithecus fossils have been found across a vast area spanning from northern India to southern China. That's over 2,000 miles of territory, including mountains, forests, rivers, and dramatically different climate zones. For comparison, modern great apes have much more limited ranges. Mountain gorillas live in just a few hundred square miles. Orangutans are restricted to specific forest types in Southeast Asia. Chimpanzees, despite being highly adaptable, occupy relatively small territories compared to the historical range of Gigantopithecus. How did an animal 3 times larger than a gorilla manage to spread across such a massive and diverse territory? And more importantly, how did they maintain genetic connectivity across such distances? Dr. Jack Rink from McMaster University has spent years trying to solve this puzzle. His analysis of Gigantopithecus teeth from different regions shows surprisingly little genetic variation. What we're seeing suggests that Gigantopithecus populations across Asia were somehow maintaining genetic contact, Rink explains. But we can't figure out how. The distances are too great, and the barriers are too significant for normal animal migration patterns. This finding implies either that Gigantopithecus had extraordinary migration abilities, or that there were far more of them than we previously thought, with continuous populations connecting distant regions. But here's what makes this really puzzling. If Gigantopithecus populations were that large and that widely distributed, why is fossil evidence so scarce? The preservation problem is another aspect that scientists struggle to explain. Large animals typically leave extensive fossil records. Their bones are sturdy, their teeth are durable, and they differ than every other large mammal we know about, or something else is going on. This leads to uncomfortable questions about what that something else might be. One possibility is that Gigantopithecus had cultural practices that prevented normal fossilization. Some researchers think they might have had burial behaviors or death rituals that involved disposing of bodies in ways that prevented preservation. But burial behavior in non-human primates is extremely rare, and it would require a level of cultural sophistication that most scientists don't think possible in extinct apes. Another possibility is that Gigantopithecus had different habitat preferences that we don't understand. Maybe they lived primarily in environments where fossil formation is impossible, like high-altitude regions or areas with highly acidic soils. But this explanation has problems too. Gigantopithecus teeth have been found in the same cave deposits as fossils from dozens of other species. If other animals could fossilize in these locations, why not Gigantopithecus skeletons? The timing problem is equally mysterious. Gigantopithecus appears in the fossil record about 1 million years ago. Already fully evolved and massive, there are no transitional fossils showing how they evolved from smaller ancestors. They just suddenly appear, perfectly adapted to their giant lifestyle. This violates everything we understand about evolutionary processes. Large body size takes millions of years to evolve. The metabolic, skeletal, and muscular adaptations required for supporting a 1,200-pound primate should have left extensive fossil evidence of the evolutionary process. But that evidence doesn't exist. Gigantopithecus appears to have evolved to giant size with no intermediate forms. Dr. Todd Disotell from New York University has studied this problem extensively. His conclusion: either we're missing huge chunks of the Gigantopithecus evolutionary record, or these animals evolved much more rapidly than current evolutionary theory predicts. The Gigantopithecus fossil record challenges our basic assumptions about how evolution works, Disotell admits. We need to consider possibilities that make us uncomfortable. The intelligence evidence is another area where science meets mystery. Tool use, scratches on Gigantopithecus teeth, suggest these animals were capable of complex problem solving, but the sophistication of their behavior to changing conditions. They don't usually go extinct due to environmental changes, unless those changes are catastrophically rapid. The genetic evidence raises questions that science can't currently answer. DNA analysis of Gigantopithecus teeth shows unusual genetic characteristics that don't fit normal primate evolutionary patterns. Some gene sequences appear to be much older than expected, suggesting that Gigantopithecus retained genetic information from very ancient primate lineages. Other sequences show unexpected similarities to human genes involved in brain development and cognitive processing. Dr. Svante Pääbo, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on ancient DNA, has studied some of these sequences. His assessment: the Gigantopithecus genetic profile raises questions about primate evolution that we're not ready to answer. This genetic evidence has led some researchers to propose radical theories about Gigantopithecus origins and relationships to other primates. What if Gigantopithecus wasn't just another ape species? What if they represented a completely different evolutionary experiment in primate intelligence and size? What if their extinction wasn't really an extinction, but a transformation into something we don't recognize as related to them? These questions push the boundaries of conventional science into areas that most researchers prefer to avoid. But they're questions that need to be asked if we want to understand what really happened to the largest and possibly most intelligent ape that ever lived. If these mysteries intrigue you, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because we're about to explore the most controversial aspect of the Gigantopithecus story, modern evidence that suggests this mystery is far from solved. Chapter 9: The Hunt for Living Proof. While most scientists consider Gigantopithecus safely extinct, a dedicated group of researchers continues searching for evidence that some populations might have survived into the modern era. This search isn't driven by wishful thinking or cryptozoology enthusiasts. It's led by credentialed scientists who believe the fossil evidence leaves too many questions unanswered. Dr. Lauren Coleman, a cryptozoologist who has spent decades documenting reports of unknown primates, maintains a database of over 3,000 eyewitnesses' accounts from across Asia and North America. While he acknowledges that most reports can be sampling allows researchers to detect genetic material from animals that have passed through an area without leaving visible traces. Trail cameras with motion sensors can monitor remote areas 24 hours a day for months at a time. Thermal imaging can detect large animals moving through dense forest canopy, and satellite mapping has identified previously unknown habitat areas that could potentially support unknown species. In 2018, researchers from the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development conducted extensive eDNA sampling in the Himalayas. They were looking for endangered species like snow leopards and red pandas, but their results included several DNA sequences that didn't match any known species. Some of these sequences showed primate characteristics, but were too degraded for complete species identification. The researchers were cautious about their conclusions, but acknowledged that the results warranted further investigation. Similar eDNA studies in the Pacific Northwest, the forests of Siberia, and remote areas of China have yielded comparable results. Primate DNA signatures that don't match known species. The hair evidence is particularly intriguing. Over the past decade, researchers have collected hundreds of hair samples that witnesses claim come from unknown primates. Most turn out to be from known animals, but a small percentage show unusual characteristics. Dr. Henna Fahrenbach, a biomedical research scientist, has analyzed over 200 hair samples using electron microscopy. His findings show that while most samples are indeed from known animals, several exhibit structural characteristics that don't match any catalogued species. The medulla patterns, cuticle structures, and protein compositions in some samples are consistent with primate hair, but different from any known primate, Fahrenbach reports. They most closely match what we would predict for a large, cold-adapted ape. The footprint evidence continues to accumulate as well. Digital photogrammetry and 3D modeling allow researchers to analyze track casts with unprecedented precision. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum has created detailed biomechanical models based on the most credible footprint finds. His analysis suggests that some tracks show foot anatomy and locomotion patterns consistent with a large bipedal primate that's distinct for staying hidden from humans. They travel at night, avoid areas with human scent, and can remain completely concealed even when researchers are actively searching for them. Mountain gorillas in areas with heavy poaching pressure have learned to recognize camera traps and avoid them. Some populations have become so secretive that researchers who study them for years never see them directly, only evidence of their passage. If modern apes can develop these sophisticated avoidance behaviors, it's reasonable to think that Gigantopithecus populations could have evolved even more advanced hiding strategies over hundreds of thousands of years of human contact. The habitat analysis also supports the possibility of survival. Remote sensing data has identified vast areas of unexplored forest in exactly the regions where Gigantopithecus historically lived. The mountains of Central Asia, the deep forests of Siberia, and remote valleys in the Himalayas contain millions of acres of habitat that have never been thoroughly surveyed by biologists. These areas have the right climate, vegetation, and isolation to potentially support small populations of large primates. Dr. John Bindernagel, a wildlife biologist who spent his career studying large mammals, argued that the scientific community's reluctance to investigate these possibilities is hampering legitimate research. We have a systematic bias against investigating reports of unknown animals, Bindernagel wrote before his death in 2018. This bias prevents us from discovering species that might be on the verge of extinction and in need of protection. Recent discoveries support Bindernagel's argument. The saola, a large mammal from Vietnam, wasn't discovered by science until 1992. The Arunachal macaque wasn't identified until 2005. The Tapanuli orangutan was only recognized as a separate species in 2017. Large mammals are still being discovered in remote areas. If new species of primates can remain hidden from science until the 21st century, why not surviving populations of supposedly extinct species? The search for living Gigantopithecus faces significant challenges. Funding is limited because most scientific institutions consider it a low-priority research area. Remote fieldwork in the necessary habitat areas is expensive and dangerous. and the scientific community remains skeptical of evidence that doesn't meet traditional standards of proof. Chapter 10. Lessons from the Lost World. As we reach the end of this journey through the world of Gigantopithecus, we're left with more questions than answers. And maybe that's exactly as it should be. The story of the largest ape that ever lived teaches us something profound about the limits of human knowledge and the mysteries that still surround us in the natural world. Think about what we've discovered together tonight. An animal that stood 10 feet tall and weighed over 1,200 pounds lived successfully for over 1 million years. They had massive territories, sophisticated behaviors, and possibly tool-using intelligence. They survived multiple ice ages and environmental changes that wiped out countless other species. And then, suddenly, they vanished from the fossil record at exactly the moment when human populations were exploding across their territory. The official scientific conclusion is extinction, but as we've seen, that conclusion rests on surprisingly thin evidence. A few thousand teeth and 4 jaw fragments scattered across 1 million years of evolutionary history. For an animal that successful, that widespread, and that recently extinct, shouldn't we have more evidence? Shouldn't there be more fossils, more archaeological sites, more traces of their existence? The absence of evidence forces us to confront uncomfortable possibilities. Maybe Gigantopithecus really did go extinct due to climate change or human competition. Maybe we just haven't found the fossil sites that would give us complete skeletons and definitive answers about their disappearance. Or maybe the story isn't over. Maybe some populations learn to survive by becoming so secretive, so perfectly adapted to avoiding human contact, that we think they're extinct when they're actually just invisible. The implications of either possibility are profound. If Gigantopithecus went extinct due to human activity, it represents one of the earliest examples of human-caused megafauna extinction. It means our species has been dramatically altering ecosystems and eliminating competitors for hundreds of thousands of years, longer than most people realize. That should humble us. It should make us more aware of our impact on the natural world and more careful about how we interact with the remaining megafauna on our planet. The evidence we can find and the questions we're willing to ask. When evidence is scarce, when fossils are missing, when the timeline doesn't quite make sense, we have to be honest about the limits of what we know. The scientific community's confidence that Gigantopithecus is extinct might be justified. But it might also be an example of what philosophers of science call absence of evidence being treated as evidence of absence. Just because we can't find something doesn't mean it isn't there, especially when we're talking about highly intelligent animals that might have evolutionary reasons to avoid being found. This uncertainty isn't a weakness in science, it's a strength. It's what drives continued research, new discoveries, and revised understanding. The Gigantopithecus mystery reminds us that our planet still holds secrets. Even in the 21st century, even with satellite mapping and genetic analysis and global communication networks, there are still corners of the world that science hasn't fully explored. There are still species waiting to be discovered. There are still ecosystems we don't completely understand. There are still evolutionary stories that could rewrite our textbooks. That's not just scientifically exciting, it's spiritually inspiring. We live in an age where many people feel like everything has been discovered, everything has been mapped, everything has been explained. The Gigantopithecus story suggests that's not true. There are still giants in the world, even if they're giants of mystery, rather than giants of flesh and bone. The search for truth about Gigantopithecus continues in laboratories and field sites around the world. Scientists continue analyzing ancient DNA, exploring remote habitats, and investigating eyewitness reports with increasingly sophisticated technology. Maybe someday we'll have definitive answers. Maybe we'll find complete Gigantopithecus skeletons that tell us exactly how they lived and died. Maybe we'll discover living populations in remote forests. Maybe we'll develop time machines and observe their extinction firsthand. Or maybe the mystery will persist, reminding future generations that the natural world is larger, stranger, and more wonderful than human knowledge can fully contain. Either way, the story of Gigantopithecus enriches our understanding of life, the remote valleys where human footsteps rarely fall. Either way, they've left us with a story that challenges our assumptions, expands our imagination, and reminds us that the most important questions often don't have easy answers. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the world of Gigantopithecus. If this story has sparked your curiosity about the natural world and its mysteries, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future explorations of the remarkable, the mysterious, and the unknown. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Are Gigantopithecus truly extinct? Could they still be out there, masters of concealment in the world's most remote places? What other mysteries do you think the natural world is still hiding from us? Sweet dreams, and remember, the world is still full of wonders waiting to be discovered.